almost 10 poetry in each issue, and essays, maybe 2 or 3 essays, and then short stories, or 1 or 2, and then some artistic essay to introduce contemporary Taiwanese artists from here. Till now, the quarterly has worked with 174 translators to publish some 2,000 pieces of works by 519 Taiwanese writers, including 887 poems, 393 essays, 470 short stories, and 233 artistic reviews. Okay, on the art of 145 local artists, so many numbers. It's a lot, actually. We actually have started to put what we have done online since the year of 2005. Our website is www.taipen.org. At the same time of the quarterly, the old ones, we still work with other companies or government associations to publish individual books. This is our latest achievement. This series is cooperated with Council for Cultural Affairs, 文建会. It's a selection of works from the old quarterly. We actually, as you have heard, there are so many pieces of works here. But it's a quarterly, it's a periodical, it gets old. But actually the literary works doesn't grow old. It's still here and it's still new and alive. So we published the series. It's called Contemporary Taiwanese Literature and Art Series, with poetry, essays, and short stories, and art. So you can see it's beautifully printed here. These books were published this and the last and the year before. And the other series is what we have done with the 国立编译馆. Now it's 国家教育研究院. The English title is National Academy for Educational Research, formerly National Institute of Compilation and Translation. We have 4 of them. The latest one is with essays written by the young writers of Taiwanese, Taiwan writers, including the 复后七日. And the other 3 ones were written by the senior writers for young people. So the series is for young people. It's called, actually it has 4 names. The first one is Beyond the Music, a selection of 20th century Taiwan poetry. 八音弦外. Okay. And the second one is Down Memory Lane, a selection of 20th century Taiwan prose, 雨夜抒怀. Okay. Here is for essays. And the third one is Grand Impressions, a selection of 20th century Taiwan short stories, 回首成还. Okay. All these 4 are newly translated, especially for this case. So it's a new translation work. We still have done many older things, like we cooperate with Columbia University Press. The first one is Three-Legged Horse by Zheng Qingwen and published in 1999. It's the first one of the CUP's Modern Chinese Literature from Taiwan series. And the other one is The Last of the Huangpo Breed, Stories of the Chinese Diaspora. 就是老兵的故事啊，最后的黄埔 ，edited by 邦元奇 and David Wei Wang in 2003. What is more famous here, local, is what we have done with the Commonwealth Publishing Company 天下出版公司。的中英对照读台湾小说 Taiwan literature in Chinese and English. It is still in the stores, in the bookstores. And Jiuge also cooperate with us to publish Immortal Sleeplessness 不朽的失眠百张小风 and 繁华散尽 When the Splendor is Gone 百料玉会 That's basically what we have done here. So just a report. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah, for the comprehensive now I'd like to ask Darryl Sterk to give us a short presentation on Taiwanese fiction, published in 2011, and also to talk briefly about his experience as a translator. Darryl, please.
Okay, hello, I'm Darryl Sterk, and I'm talking as a translator. And the title of my talk is Taiwan Fiction in English, Lost and Found in Translation. It's not the most interesting title for a talk on translation, but it appeals to me for personal reasons. I feel like I have personally gotten lost in translation over the years. I lost my way when I came to Taiwan, it's 16 years ago now, and I was going to study English literature until the promise of adventure drew me away from the well-trodden path away to Taiwan. And Taiwan in the mid-1990s was a fairly well-trodden path, especially for some reason for Canadians. But for me at the time, it was off the map. And for a long, long time, I didn't know where I was, who I was, what I was doing. I had to learn how to speak again. I had to adapt to life in the overcrowded subtropical concrete paradise of Taipei. And then when I went back to Canada, I felt that I was no longer so much at home. And since then, I've been more or less transcendentally homeless. But Taiwan literature and the translation of Taiwan literature have in the past few years become a personal beacon. Sarah and Professor Liang and the good folks at the Chinese Pen have given me the chance to keep myself out of trouble by translating Taiwan literature into English for the past 5 years. And through Sarah, I got the chance to meet Gray Tan last summer. Because of Gray, I now have the chance to translate a novel into English. I was interviewed about 6 months ago now for an article called Translation Projects Unlock World of Taiwan Literature. It's online. It's by a British fellow called Stephen Crook. And I was interviewed for this article last March, I guess almost a year ago. And at that time, I thought that translating a novel was still a distant dream, and now it's kind of come true. And for me, that seems very important. The word translation, according to the online etymological dictionary, which is practically my second home, used to mean the transport of a saint's body or a relic to a new sanctuary or reliquary. And it seems a bit crazy to say this, but for me, translation is about the closest I get to a personal religion, to the sense of life becoming sacred through language, because somehow, due to the defamiliarizing effect of Chinese, I can see the world anew. And it seems as if when I'm translating literature, I've somehow been transported from the realm of commercial exchange, the marketplace, to a sacred space. And as one of the members of the audience, I think he's here, recently reminded me, the scholar Lewis Hyde defines literature as a gift given to the writer, which the writer is then obliged to share with the world. And as a translator of literature, I guess I'm nothing unless I give it my all anytime I translate. Enough about me. How is Taiwan fiction lost and found in translation? A lot of the linguistic features are lost. Michael Berry, another well-known translator who was also interviewed for the same article, notes how wonderfully multilingual Taiwan is. China is also multilingual, but in China there's enormous pressure towards Mandarin. You may have heard of the recent incident involving Kong Qingdong, a professor from Beida, who was offended that people in Hong Kong still speak Cantonese. Cantonese is a mere dialect, he said. Everyone should be speaking Mandarin and so forth. And in Taiwan today, of course, there is conflict over language, but for the most part, people celebrate linguistic diversity. And I think it's fair to say that Taiwan is more polyglot than most English-speaking countries. Most people understand both Mandarin and Taiwanese, and these are different languages, farther apart than Italian and Spanish. Taiwanese is mostly oral, and most Taiwanese speakers can't write in Taiwanese, but there's a whole world of stylistic variation in Taiwanese, from expletives to elegant language, and there's no way you can translate that into English. It gets lost in translation. And sometimes I'd like to be able to break into Dutch in the middle of my translation, but who would understand? And it doesn't reflect the linguistic situation in any English-speaking country. There's also a structural difference between Chinese and Taiwanese Mandarin that gets lost in translation. I'm translating Alai, the Tibetan writer now, and just a short story. And the sentences seem to me like English sentences, and it's not because Alai is Tibetan, because he's a native Chinese speaker. Sentences in Taiwan Mandarin seem to go on and on and on and on, because people have a semantic concept of what a sentence is. And in mainland China, people seem to have a structural concept of what a sentence is, as in English. And this all gets lost in translation, the more formal aspects of language. Now, moving on to what is translatable, the problem of modernity and identity, I'll call it. Alai, the Tibetan writer in China, is really interesting because of his attitude towards culture. As a Tibetan writer based in Sichuan, he seems really keen on modernity, on modernization. The past was feudal and modernity is a good thing. And it's kind of a shocking position for a Tibetan writer to take, but it's the position that he takes. And writers in mainland China, it seems to me, are much more gung-ho about progress and modernization and modernity than writers in Taiwan. Taiwan's writers used to have to be gung-ho about progress when Taiwan was under martial law. But the more progress you have, the more you start feeling like you're losing something. You're losing your culture, or you're losing yourself. And as moderns, Taiwan writers tend to sense that tradition is vanishing, and as postmodern writers, that they tend to worry that it's already vanished. And modernization in Taiwan kind of happened all at once in the 1960s and the 1970s, and it's kind of left Taiwan writers wondering who the hell they are and what they should be doing with their lives, like a lot of us, I think. And if you don't know what you're doing, then you go in search of yourself, and anytime anyone talks about Taiwan literature or Taiwan culture, they mention the issue of identity, as if identity is the main issue. Shouldn't have folded my pages. Okay. So Taiwan doesn't know what it is. Taiwanese people don't know if they're ethnic or national and so forth. And I should think that this kind of search for identity would resonate with foreign readers, that it would be found in translation that would be translatable. There's another article I can recommend, published by the online journal Asymptote, and I translated it. It's called Antonio Chen on Taiwanese Novelists in 2011. And Professor Antonio Chen categorizes this year's novels from Taiwan, mostly thematically, but all the themes relate in one way or another to Taiwan's postmodern search for identity. Antonio mentions, for instance, neo-nativism. Now, nativism in literature is the same all around the world. Nativist stories about rural life in traditional villages get written by urban intellectuals who couldn't stand to live in traditional villages, but they don't like the city very much either. And Taiwan's nativist literature was written in the 1970s, a time, surprise, surprise, when Taiwan is urbanizing and industrializing. And neo-nativism this year revisits nativism 4 decades later, when rural life has almost totally vanished. China is still over 50% farmers, and Taiwan is less than 5%. Only a few percent of people in Taiwan are in agriculture, but it's not completely vanished. I live in a little farming community now, and I have a garden, and once in a while I see really old people farming in the traditional way. I saw an old woman the other day planting rice seedlings by hand, and right around the corner from my house is a sacred tree as old as your grandfather, an old banyan tree, and people still worship this tree. But soon it will all pass away, and then we'll have neo-nativism. I'd like to say a few words now about the novel I'm translating in the context of Taiwan postmodern search for identity. The novel is called The Man with the Compound Eyes. It's an eco-dystopia. In the novel, there's this huge plastic trash vortex floating around in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, as there is indeed a plastic trash vortex in the Pacific. And in the novel, it swirls around until it becomes a trash island, and then the trash island starts to split up, and then one part of it hits the east coast of Taiwan. And here's a bit of an excerpt from the novel. This was a summer the islanders would never forget. It all started one gloomy summer's morning when, at the cusp of dawn, hail began falling to the south of the coastal town of Haven. Woken up out of the deepest dreams, people walked outside or stood by the window and looked out bewildered at a seemingly shrunken, dried-up world. Lit by the street lamps, shooting hunks of hail pounded the seashore, glowing like asteroids with a silver-blue light. Although the sound of the hail battering the corrugated iron roofs, the asphalt road, the stone steps by the beach, the street lamps, and the cars parked by the side of the road must have been deafening, for some reason people's memories of the scene that morning were like pantomimes or silent movies. Nobody remembered hearing a thing. The hailstorm stopped as soon as it had started, but because of the hail, the news crews on the beach missed the moment everyone had been waiting for, the moment when the trash vortex, which was being carried in waves toward the shore, became visible. The hailstorm was the reason why everyone scrambled up onto the road and avoided the deadly deluge. Then, in the moments after the hail stopped, the storm clouds kept changing, with white, lead-hued, and purple clouds gathering into a magnificent, soaring thunderhead. It was a cloud like a mythic vision, like a sublime line of epic verse. When they remembered it later on, the Aboriginal villagers up and down the coast all said they had never seen a cloud formation like that before, not even at dusk on the eve of a super typhoon. The cameramen were all shooting this astounding sight, and all the while the monster wave was rolling towards the shore in the faint light of dawn. Many thought the wave explained why they did not seem to remember hearing anything during the hailstorm. Though its source was near, the sound of the hail was nothing compared to the force augured by the wave. That wave spoke with a cosmic voice, as if the moon had been waiting since time immemorial to make itself heard. By the time people figured out that the sound was coming from the sea, the wave was already upon them, and so on and so forth. And the amazing thing in the novel is that very few people seem to care that there is all this trash littered on the east coast of Taiwan. For urbanites, the disaster is very far away, out of sight, and soon out of mind. People get tired of watching images of environmental devastation on television, and television reality is virtual anyway. It's not really real, and it doesn't interfere with my daily life, and so forth. But of course, some people in the novel do care. The disaster changes their life, and the novel is about these people. One is a Chinese professor of literature with a Danish adventurer husband, and she makes friends with local indigenous people on Taiwan's east coast, and the local indigenous people are trying to maintain their cultural traditions, including the close relationship to nature, and they do this through hunting and cultivation. And in the course of doing so, they open up this forest church for tourists, but also partly for themselves. Anyway, the novel registers an environmental anxiety, a desire to return to nature, and a desire which has, in the past few years, started drawing Taiwan's Chinese urbanites towards its Aboriginal population. And this kind of longing for the indigenous is usually called primitivism. And ever since the noble savage, primitivists have been people who feel that as moderns or postmoderns, they've lost something, and I should think that people in settler societies like Canada, the US, Australia, and New Zealand can relate to this combination of guilt and fascination that Taiwan's Chinese people feel towards its Aboriginal people. But I should also think that anyone who, like James Cameron's Avatar, might find the combination of the eco and the abo appealing. Primitivism is everywhere this year in Taiwan fiction. Antonio Chen describes 2011 as the year of the Aborigine in Taiwan. This is mostly because of Siddiq Bale, it's called Warriors of the Rainbow Bridge in English, the biggest Taiwan film ever, written about in The Economist, and about an indigenous resistance to the Japanese in 1930. I think that Siddiq Bale is so appealing because the star of the film is so totally and completely sure about who he is. His identity is completely externalized as a status. He's got 2 tattoos, one on his forehead, one on his chin, and these tattoos prove that he's a real man, and he believes that after he dies, he will walk across the Rainbow Bridge to the happy hunting ground of the afterlife. He's so sure about who he is, just like Jake Sully at the end of Avatar, and modern Taiwanese people in an age of confused identities find this idea of being totally sure of who they are very appealing. But Siddiq Bale is only one only the most obvious example of contemporary Taiwanese primitivism. There are 2 other novels out this year about Taiwan in the 17th century, time when early Chinese settlers fought with and married Aborigines, while the Dutch and the Spanish seized control of little corners of Taiwan to the southwest and north. It was also a time when the pirate Zheng Zilong romanced an Aboriginal princess. She's kind of like a Taiwanese Pocahontas, except that she knows how to do kung fu, and she defends her tribe with kung fu. So Pocahontas who could do kung fu. And the Taiwan writer who's perhaps best known outside of Taiwan, Li Ang, wrote the novel The Butcher's Wife, translated by Howard Goldblatt, kind of got Howard Goldblatt's career off the ground, has this year written a novel about Plains Aboriginal spirit medium, novels called Possession, Fu Shen. A lot of Taiwanese people still believe in the spirit world, and they imagine it through Buddhism, Taoism, Chinese folk religion, and Aboriginal spirituality. And the main characters in the novel are possessed by the past. They can't get on with their lives. They're traumatized, haunted, hag-ridden. They lose their way, but through the auspices of this Aboriginal shamaness, they find themselves again. The spirits affect a re-enchantment of the world. And I think Li Ang, the writer, sees herself as kind of a spiritual midwife for her readers. And she helps them find themselves. And as a translator, I get to do a kind of really close reading, and so translation becomes for me a form of therapy, and the result of that therapy is something that might be useful to someone in English, and Li Ang helps readers find themselves in the original, and if I do my job in translation as well. Thank you very much.
Now we're moving to the publishing side of things, so we'll ask Tina to talk about her experience as a literary agent who represents a lot of Chinese writers and trying to sell them to the Western world. What are the obstacles and some of your headaches, troubles you've met? Because I remember we had a coffee in Shanghai. That's all we were talking about.
Okay, so I just wanted to start off with just a brief introduction on Peony Literary Agency, which is where I work. Peony is based in Hong Kong, and we represent mostly Chinese language authors, and we sell translation rights into foreign countries. So since we're probably the only agency who solely focuses on this, and we started doing this quite early on, we did get the cream of the crop in terms of heavyweight Chinese authors. For example, we represent Yan Geling, whose recent novel, The Flowers of War, Jingling Shishan Cai, it was recently turned into a movie by Zhang Yimou starring Christian Bale, and we've had great success with that book, selling it into US, UK, Germany, Spain, Netherlands, France, Italy, so on. And we represent Han Han, who is a much talked about author, blogger, race car driver in China. You know, we sold him to Simon & Schuster in the US in a 2-book deal. Another author that we've had great success with was Chen Guanzhong, Chan Kun-cheng, who wrote The Fat Years, which wasn't published in China. It wouldn't be published in China, and we had great success with that book. It's been sold to over a dozen languages, and it's kind of a modern dystopian novel in a kind of what-if society about China. Besides those authors, we represent, as Grace said, we represent Su Tong, Mo Yan, Wang Anyi, and we're constantly on the lookout for young, new, fresh voices. So this year is very exciting for us because we've signed on a lot of different kinds of authors. We take good care of our established authors, but we're really looking for fresh young voices, and being from Taiwan myself, I always keep my eye out for Taiwanese writers that we can help spread to the rest of the world. So a large part of what I do in Shanghai, which is where I'm based, I scout. I scout for authors. I speak to publishers. I speak to people in media. I speak to authors who read other people's works. I keep track about the trends. I keep my finger on the pulse, what's going on in China, what people are writing about, what people are buzzing about. So that's a large part of my job in Shanghai. So to get into the business side of things, when we come across an author that we think has high potential, that we really like to take on, it's very important for us to really find out who exactly owns the rights. Because a lot of times, the author doesn't know that in his or her original Chinese language publishing contract, he or she has actually signed away all the subsidiary rights, including film rights, media rights, digital rights, and translation rights. So we usually try to do our due diligence. We look at contracts. We look at the original contracts that they've signed, and we find out if they had, in fact, signed away the rights. And if they haven't, that's great. Or if the book hadn't even been published in China yet, that's great. We sign an exclusive representation right with these authors, and we're ready to do our work with that. But in the second case, if in fact this author's book has been published in China, and the publisher did include a clause in which they do own the representation rights, we approach the publishers. And it's a 3-way conversation with the author. Everything is very transparent, and we basically go to the publisher and we tell them what our intentions are, that we think that this book is great and we'd like to take it outside of China. Sometimes, yes, the publishers are a little bit hesitant. They don't really know what we're doing. But fortunately, I've usually been successful in convincing publishers that, you know, we're a legitimate company and we do successfully sell rights. So usually there's a bit of negotiation there, and we draft up a contract. And one of the most important things to us is exclusivity. A lot of Chinese publishers don't always want to give us exclusivity, but that is very important to us because we've had situations where the author or the publisher gives us the right to represent, but then they also give another person right to represent, or the author's father decides that he wants to represent, or their friend, or their publisher decides to do it themselves. So we really do insist on exclusivity. It's something that we've learned over the years, especially because we want to avoid double submissions. If an editor receives a book twice, it's not really favorable. We've learned that sometimes foreign publishers do approach authors and ask them about, you know, if they could translate their novels, and a lot of times the authors are so happy to get an email like this that they immediately agree, but we kind of go in there and we make sure that these rights haven't already been taken by someone else. Because sometimes the authors don't even recognize themselves what they've signed in their publishing contract. So we go in there and we kind of read the fine lines. So this also brings us to a lot of authors give us backlist titles. So we actually do go through almost every backlist title contract that we can get our hands on, and we make sure that the rights do belong to the author or the publisher, and the same process happens again. Or we look for overlapping contracts, or violation of rights or when a contract has expired, we can revert the rights. And so Max's company has actually helped us with some of our authors where they've helped us revert rights back to our authors so we are able to represent them. So that's a large part of what we do, and another important aspect in bringing literature out is the translators. And I have to say, I think translators deserve a lot more credit than they're given. I think people like Darryl, they are huge advocates for these books, and they do so much, and they're really not recognized enough. Because finding the right translator is so very crucial to what we do. When we submit, we send in a sample translation, 30, 50 pages of English text, and for us to find that right translator, we might ask 3 translators to translate the samples for us, and we have to pick which one stays true to the text, which one conveys the mood or the tone properly. And there's really not enough good translators out there, and I think they are they are a key aspect to translation to literature abroad, and there are funds in China and in Taiwan. If you were here for the press conference right before this panel, there are funds that provide grants or subsidies for translation, literature and translation, because the government does encourage this kind of work to be done, and they're very generous. They're actually very generous, and publishers do get their money. And the application process in China, which is what I'm familiar with, is very simple. You need a contract. You need to make sure that the book has been published, and they're very good with encouraging this kind of work that we do. And so another important kind of aspect of my job is we're starting to do a lot of rights in China. We help Chinese publishers or other Chinese authors and other authors get published in China, and that's kind of a whole nother beast. When I first started approaching publishers on behalf of our Chinese authors about their Chinese contracts, they were kind of hesitant because Chinese publishers they're not used to the concept of authors having agents and negotiating publishing contracts with them. And I come in there and I say, well, if you want to publish, Yenga Ling's book, I need to take this clause out, I need to add this clause in, raise this number, lower this number, and they are like, who are you and why are you doing this? But it's after doing this for a couple of years, I've established really good relationships with these publishers, and they realize that I'm there on behalf of the authors, and we all just want a fair contract with a good book, and we all just want to get the book published. So I think now, as the Chinese publishing market is getting more global and they're becoming more international, they do recognize that agents are very much a part of authors' lives, and they're very helpful actually. They're very easy to work with nowadays. And I just wanted to end my little section on digital rights, which would take a whole hour to talk about, but it is definitely evolving very fast in China, in Taiwan. Piracy is definitely an issue. It's something that I deal with a lot, especially with digital books in China. But it's not even just in China. Some of you may have seen in the news where Chinese writers have come together and they're suing Apple because they're finding that their books are being sold in the App Store for 99 cents or for free. They're being downloaded for free. And we've had success where we have contacted Apple and we've had books removed. The sellers aren't selling them anymore. But it's very, very little what we can do, and it's a very big digital world out there. But I think if any of you want to talk about that, we can approach me later or something, because I don't want to take up any more time. But I just want to end on that and just say that it is definitely something that is to be watched, in the future. So thank you.
I had a few questions for Tina. The first one is, you mentioned that sometimes when you sign in him or her on, he has already signed away the subsidiary rights to a publisher. So when you approach a publisher, do they take percentage?
Yes, actually, I mean, ideally they would just give it to us, but they do. We do take a cut with them, and it's the author agrees, and the publisher agrees, and we sign a contract that is three-way. So anything, but then we get a lot of help from the publishers in terms of sales figures, marketing material. When we need them to send books anywhere, they do that. So it works out. We actually don't lower any of our commission. They just take another cut, and it's usually not a bad number. So everyone is usually happy in the end. Yeah.
Sounds good. Right now, I'd like to ask Max. Max is one of the
Hello.
Max is one of the most experienced rights manager in Taiwan, and I think your experience is mostly about buying for books. But I'm wondering if you can share some of the things or experience you've learned from buying rights, and that would be useful reference for international publishers when they want to buy rights from Chinese or Taiwanese authors. What problem they might face, and what kind of arrangements, what pitfalls they should avoid, for example.
Hello, everyone. I'm Max Lin, from遠流Publishing. That question is too big for me. Actually, I'm not very sure, why Gray asked me to join this, to sit among these nice people, because what can I say? Because I really have that much story to tell. Honestly, I think the most for the moment the story for that field is his own creation. His success story, selling the man with compound eye to 4 countries. Yeah, for me that's a story. But in my job for these years, I do have some experience in licensing some authors out. But previously I have this theory: if you want to sell rights to all over the world, you have to go through China. That's my theory, previously. And upon that theory, so I have tried to sell my author to China. And I like to share this experience with you. Is it okay? Yeah. Years ago, when I started to do that, I had this author Wang Wenhua when I was with this other publishing house, and at that time I tried to convince some publishing house in Shanghai. We tried to co-work with some newspaper there, and we make this successful serial syndication, and make people in Shanghai know about Wang Wenhua's great work, That Measure Nuhai. So we have successfully made it into a great bestseller. It ran maybe 300,000 copies in Shanghai, in China. And after that, my theory has come true. Japanese publishing house, Korean publishing house, even American ones has come to us to try to get rights from us. And I did successfully license it out to Japan and Korea. So that's my theory. I always thought we have to do it that way, because besides that, previously when we try to get our novels translated into other country, we always have to get a sponsorship from our government, something like the Chinese pen, or from some some NPO. We always get money from this kind of institutions. And with that, which may be a very good thing, we have people paying for our own, public good. We can get great work translated in by great hands. That's great. But for me, I think we should bear in mind that kind of practice is limited. It's very limited. So we can really count on them to do the job regularly. I think, from somewhere, real business has to take over. So I try to do it that way. When I try to go through China, I always thought it as, it's a slow boat from China. I try to, get something, slow bowling, and then somebody from Western country, they will notice. But I don't think that theory is totally wrong, because, the fact that we are sitting here, we sitting here, we Chinese-speaking people, and we sitting here, we try to make speech in English. That explains something, that explains some value. So, in that kind of value, we can expect, Chinese novel, not just Chinese novel, Taiwanese novel. We can expect that to be translated a lot into other countries. That's my theory. But, from my experience, I do find somewhat I was wrong. From example of Drake, I found if you work really hard, if you have the right connection, even a novel like A Man with Compound Eyes, that book is not very selling well.
It was more like a critical hit than the really bestseller.
But still, Greg has got this way to to sell it, to sell it. Yeah, that's great. So I start to doubt myself. I start to think maybe I was wrong. Maybe I can use the other way. But still, the practice is there. I was still doing that way. So recently, I tried to sell the film Siddiq Ballet. Siddiq Ballet, our house,远流has published six titles on Siddiq Ballet. And when I tried to sell it to the world, I found it's not possible, because people they keep telling me we don't understand, we haven't watched the movie, and they will ask where did it go in China. So the first move, you have to go to China, and as you can see, that's not very easy job. Previously China has this secret resistance on this topic, this rebellion type topic.
Yeah.
So, but successfully, we have persuaded the Chinese government to let go. So you will see you may be on release in February or in March in March. So I tried to convince this publishing house in Shanghai, and they are they are preparing for publication of a Chinese edition of a director ballet, the Darryl Ballet. It will publish it maybe in March. So at that situation, I think in Taiwan, when we try to sell our rights to the world, we have to do one thing first. We have to urge our government. We have to try to combine the whole Chinese publishing world. We have to make our own standard, make our own value. We have to try to make our own Hollywood or Bollywood. We have to let the other world they see our standard. They will see our creation, our movies, or not movies. In this topic we were talking about publishing. We have to let the world see our publication. They will see it as they see their publication. In that situation, we can expect our novels to be translated a lot. And at this situation, I have one more thing to share. Is years ago when I tried to license Zhang Daqun's Chen Bang Baoli Tuan to China, something happened there. It's about 9 or 10 years ago. There is this inquiring interest from a publishing house in Beijing. It is a very good publishing house indeed. But I talked with them. I was authorized by the author to negotiate with them. And the offer is average. Maybe 5,000 printing run, average royalty rate. But at that time, it seems to be natural to say yes, to accept it. And I almost convinced the author to do that. And then some idea struck me. As the famous line in this movie, Chongqing Express has said, I keep wondering if the other California is as raining as this. I have this feeling something may happen in the near future. So I convinced the author Zhang Dachun to hold for a while. I had this hunch. I think if we will do it a few years later, this book will get the attention it deserves. And Zhang Dachun was buying it. He has waited for 8 years, and 8 years later, when in 2010, this time the situation is totally different. 3 major publishing houses offered, and the winning offer.
I think it was for a first print run of 100,000 copies. It was a huge advance. Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. They guaranteed first printing at 100,000 cents.
100,000 copies. Set, yeah.
It's not copies.
This was a long book. It was divided into 2 volumes.
Yeah, you know that very well. So from 5,000 to 100,000. So that's a great distance. And the only factor to make this difference is time. So in this situation, I find waiting could be a very good strategy. But that's for Zhang Dachun. And I have to admit, in Grace, the man with Kanban eye case, I find something more, courageous. I have to admit his way, he's not just waiting, just like me. I always try to wait for the larger climate to change. I always to find, to try to find, when this situation turning into more favorable to me. I think it's a very good strategy for a tiny island like us. But I try to persuade myself to believe the other belief. I try to think maybe in the future we try to not to just wait. We have to create. We need more people like Gray. We need people to make first class sample translation. We may have to work like a Korean people has done in last 10 years. And I think we have to we as with Taiwan publishing world, we have to reinvent ourselves. I think the old thinking like I always has had is maybe not that right. So in here I try to share with you is I have different thinking about licensing our novels out, and I will try to do something positive about this. And I think with that kind of that kind of investment, we will do things better. I think with vision like Gray and Professor Sterk, with vision like that, with hard working, I think the situation will get better and better from now on.
Well, I actually agree with your theory that having a sale in China certainly helps, because I think I'm sure Tina will agree. having a book from China, your first sell is you always look for the first sell into Taiwan and vice versa, because it's the same language, it's easier. And if a Taiwanese book is published in China, like 讲大学满宝利团, and becomes a big bestseller there, because it's a huge market, it is definitely a lot easier to persuade a foreign publisher. See, this book has sold 1 million copies in China. They will pay attention. Yeah, I think that's a very solid theory. And another.
So you agree to my theory?
I think so. I think that's a very good beginning, very practical, because it's easier to sell a Taiwanese book into China first, and then to sell a book from China into Taiwan. And my other theory, which I'm sure will agree, is that if we want to sell a Chinese book into the West, you really have to have an agent, because the international rights business is something really out of the shall we say, the ordinary publishing experience. Both in China and Taiwan, it's a completely different game. You really have to know your contacts, go to book fairs, and know how rights deals are done. And also because publishing in the West is quite different than from China. You get all these different clauses, different editions. I used to have this author who received her contract, and she asked me, why are they paying me this really low, ridiculous 6% royalty rate? Is the publisher trying to rip me off? And I told her, no, because that is mass market paperback edition. You have a hardcover edition with a much higher royalty rate, which starts at 12% and goes to 15%. So that's the kind of, it's just out of, they cannot imagine. So yeah, that's my experience. Now we will open the panel to the floor. If any of you have any questions for our speakers.
Thank you for the presentations. I'm personally very comfortable with the concept of using agents for all kinds of services, right? But I believe the concept is not yet right in Taiwan. I mean, for authors to enlist the help of agents to get the books published, this is something that the normal author or owner author in Taiwan has yet to accept. And if I'm a successful writer here, can you give me some incentive why I should seek your help in getting my books published?
Yeah, I can take that, and then if Gray wants to fill in, I think he could as well. Well, I think the main advantage of agents is we, as Gray said, we have the contacts, and we travel, and we go to book fairs, and we talk to publishers every day, every hour, every minute of our lives. And we usually know the right people to go to. We know which editor to send which kind of book to. And if you're an author, you might just know publishers, but you might not know, exactly who to send to. And we also look out for you in terms of contracts. We look through every contract, we look through every clause, and we explain it to you, and we make sure that you're protected, and we negotiate for you. We have your best interest in mind, and we're able to net from different publishers instead of just settling or just going with one publisher who we think has a nice offer. And just on the whole, agents are working for you, and they have your best interest in mind. So in my experience, actually, authors haven't been very resistant. They've actually been very happy to have us, work for them and represent their work. Because most of the times authors want to spend their time writing. They don't want to spend their time corresponding with publishers. They don't want to look at contracts. They don't want to do any of that. And we do that for them. So they're actually very happy to have us with them.
My strategy is a bit different, is that I know a lot of established, successful authors, both in Taiwan and China. They already have strong connection with local publishers. And I don't want to step in. So I tell them, I am only interested in representing you abroad. So I handle translation rights for them. And if you're an author from China, I also try to sell your book in Taiwan. And if you, for example, Wu Ming is the man with the compound eyes, he has very close relationship with this editor, and he followed her from different publishers. So I'm not going to step into that relationship. I'm only handling, I sold the book in China, I sold the book to other foreign countries. So I think that's, but I think what Peony has been doing in China is something truly revolutionary. Well, I cannot imagine the kind of resistance they'll get from Chinese publishers, because they really don't buy books from agents.
Well, yeah, most of the time we actually do the same thing you do. Authors are very good friends usually with the publishers, and they're very loyal to them most of the time. So we do usually are also talking about just translation rights. We don't really do their Chinese language rights unless they ask us to, or they haven't been published in China yet, and they come to us to get a publisher in China. But yeah, I agree. We usually just say, you know, you can go with the publisher that you've gone with for years in China, but we want to help you with translation rights.
You mentioned the phrase best interest twice. You take the author's best interest. How is it best interest translated to commission?
Well, we don't get a cent before we make a deal, and everything that we submit, that includes, you know, the hours that we put into the manpower and the money that we put into in terms of funding sample translations, that comes out of us. So really, obviously, we try to negotiate a higher deal because we do get a percentage of it, but the author doesn't pay us anything up front or anything at all until we make a deal with them. So it is their best interest.
I think that's the fundamental rules of the agenting system, is that the proprietor makes money and then the agent makes money. If the agent asks for money up front, there must be something fishy going on. Yeah.
We don't want to see the situation where you have a vampire second blood with authors. You make lives share, the author makes little money on it. That's, I mean, at least in this part of the world, it's something we don't want to see right now.
More questions?
No, I don't think that'll be necessary. Well, I'm a freelance translator myself. I'm currently studying my master's at the Graduate Institute of Translation and Interpretation. But I have two questions here. First is, how do you find translators? My experience with working with Taiwanese publishers is that usually they either just put an name on the ad, or they ask someone they know if they can find someone to translate their books, and then they probably email the sample to maybe 3, 5, or even more translators, and eventually pick the translator. And I want to know if publishers based in the UK or the US or rights agencies find translators the same way or not. My second question is there a niche in this business for me, like translating Taiwanese literature into English? Of course, I understand that like the top agencies and, for example, Chinese can want the best translators. And when we're talking about the best translators, we talk about those who translate into their native language, for example, English in this case. But I was just wondering, as a native translator here, I understand the Taiwanese culture better and the language better here. So is there something I can do here, for example, for me to recommend some literary works that I really love, for example, Zhu Shao's works, and then maybe I'm not really qualified to translate the books myself, but I'm definitely good enough to, for example, translate the first chapter, or to write a summary of the book and then recommend that to relevant publishers or rights agency, and I want to know what you think about that.
Sarah, do you want to take the question? About your own experience of finding jobs? And
that's okay. 我也是翻译所的学生，我没有毕业，我是翻译所肄业。But it was a personal connection with Michelle Wu Mingjia. Michelle was my teacher at Shida, and she introduced me to Sarah, and And that's the whole story, basically, until last summer. As for whether you can translate Taiwanese literature into English, it depends how good you are. I mean, you sound very good. And I should think that it might be possible. It's not just a question of English, it's also your kind of background in English literature, your sense of literary style, and there's a possibility of cooperation, I guess, if you wanted to work with an English native speaker on a translation to English. It's been known to happen. It's definitely a possibility. Everyone has his or her strength, and so linguistic is one strength, but also cultural, as you mentioned. You're more familiar with the linguistic and cultural kind of situation in Taiwan, sure. And why not try to cooperate on a translation? And there are native Chinese speakers from Taiwan who didn't go abroad until they were 22 or 23 and ended up being able to translate Taiwan literature into English. There are people like this, and maybe you're one of them.
So talk to Sarah after.
Okay. Thank you.
Any more questions?
I'm also a translator, but I just translated there. But I was wondering how easy, I think when it comes to products, I want to ask something about trust. Like you're talking about talking to the authors, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of different from like buying a book. How do you get, it's not difficult, so how do you gain trust after this book? They don't know whether we can have it in words, but they don't fully understand them. They need to convey to what you're trying to speak to them. So I was wondering how this process
Did you mean how do we persuade an author to sign up with us?
And how do you those things? Yes, that's our job. Or like the way or the set.
Process of finding
Oh, I'm scared to just one thing. The other is how, like, imagine the concept of you manage to imagine and the other is how you come up with right authors that help you reach your publishing house.
Okay, I hope I understand your question. Yeah, let me know if I'm going off track. But well, I think when we want to sign up with an author and we want them to trust us, we meet them face to face. A lot of it is just meeting them and telling them what we think about their work and what we have planned for them or what we think we can do for them. And a lot, it's not a very kind of cold. We call them and we email them. We try to meet them and we try to just face to face tell them that we really are passionate about their work and we think we can get it translated. And as I explained earlier, we don't take anything until we make a deal for them. So essentially, it's zero loss for them. We take a lot of the risk on our side, yeah, because we do put in a lot of time, we put in a lot of energy, we put in a lot of money into selling an author. And in the end, if we don't make a sale, they don't lose a penny, but we actually do. So I think a lot of the authors do recognize that, and so they do see that they believe us, that we're going to try really hard to sell their book. And I think that's how this trust is established.
You mentioned that sometimes you would commission several different samples. Do you pay for all of them and get on one, or?
Yeah, well, sometimes if there's a translator, sometimes we get books recommended to us through translators. And there are translators who actually already have something translated. They're saying, I love this book, I've translated it, I think you should look at it. And boom, we have an English translation in our hands. But yeah, most of the times it's out of pocket. Sometimes the author is more than happy to pay for it themselves, or they have already paid for it themselves. And an author will be like, actually, I got a friend to do it. So there's many different ways, and we just try to find the best translation ever in our submissions to the publishers.
And also, I think in terms of literature, it's really subjective. So what I love, Tina probably doesn't love. What she loves, I probably won't. So you'll see very different clients, and each of us has a different way of putting authors. Face-to-face is very important, of course. And for me, I'm kind of reclusive sometimes. So I write very long emails, and of course it's also about the accumulation of your efforts. So you've sold one book, and when you're talking to the next author, you say, look, I've sold this one. And so I've had track record. When you sold two, it'll probably become easier. So it's really about how long you can last in the game. Eventually you'll have a break. And yeah, it's really about, yeah. Any more questions from any of our fellows? Ivy?
Hi, my name is Ziv Lewis. I work at Kinneret Smora in Israel.
You need microphones?
Sorry?
You need microphones?
No, I'll talk loudly. I just want to make two brief comments. One is on the subject of sample translations. We are often offered books from Asian languages, which is difficult for my team to read, and the original plus 40 pages of sample translation. There's nothing more destructive than a bad sample translation. So that's something I would say to agents trying to sell me books or publishers trying to sell me books, and make sure that your translation is as spot on as it can be, because it can work against you to submit. Because we will read the sample, and only if the sample's good, we will give the original to a reader, which costs me a lot of money to get Chinese manuscript read, so I'll read the sample English first. And the second thing is to answer this gentleman here, the translator. We use literary scouts in the large markets. In the small markets like here, I would be happy to be in touch with someone like you who could recommend a book on a one-off basis. And I think a lot of publishers internationally would be prepared to. We have arrangements in different markets where we pay a finder's fee. We call it a finder's fee. Someone who recommends a book to me, we check the book out, we decide to buy it, we'll pay the finder a one-off fee just for finding that book for me. And then I can decide to go with him as a translator or not. That's my prerogative. But I would like to be in informal touch with several people across China, Taiwan, who just say, this is a great book, you should check it out.
No more question? And that's about it. Thank you for attending. Thanks for all the speakers. 等一下，那个从4点半开始在这边，有一个到6点是那个国际版权的交流茶会，所以会有蛮多中外的出版人过来，那也有吃的有喝的，所以大家如果有空的话，可以在这边多认识一些人。